After 5 years of caring for my paralyzed wife, I overheard her call me a free servant, and that moment fractured something deep inside me. I never imagined that the person I had once promised to cherish would speak of me like that, but she did, casually, as if I were just an appliance that refilled itself with patience. I had devoted half a decade to her, 5 long years of feeding, cleaning, adjusting, lifting, learning every maneuver the therapist taught me so she wouldn't develop sores or stiffness. 5 years of waking up at 2 a.m. when she whimpered in pain, of wiping away her tears, of reminding myself that love was supposed to endure the unimaginable. Then one afternoon, while delivering her favorite banana muffins to the rehab courtyard, I heard her laugh. "He's basically a free caretaker," she said to another patient. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Come on, no salary, no arguments, and he's still strong enough to do all the heavy lifting. She chuckled like she was sharing a joke, not dismantling my dignity. I'm not dumb. I locked down the perfect setup early. He does it all. Feeds me, cleans the place, manages the bills. That's not a husband. That's a full-time package for free. And when I'm gone, everything goes to Anna. Obviously, she's my girl. My fingers froze around the bag of muffins. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I had baked those muffins with so much care that morning, still warm when I left home, still warm when I arrived. Just like my heart had been until that moment. Her laughter curdled something inside me. I hadn't married her for gratitude or reward. I simply believed love meant loyalty. But right then, loyalty felt like a noose. I slipped away before she could notice me, afraid that if I stepped into the sunlight, she'd see my face and recognize what she'd done to me. When I came back to her hospital room later, she was lying under a fleece blanket, her eyes bright with fake sweetness. "Mark, there you are? Did you bring the muffins?" I didn't answer. I just set the bag down on the table beside her. No apology, no shame from her, just that same unbothered tone. "You shouldn't wear yourself out, babe. You're too reliable," she added, repeating the same words she had used downstairs. Reliable, useful, obedient. None of them sounded like love anymore. That night, I didn't go back to the hospital. I let the nurses handle her care. I stayed home, surrounded by the ghost of a house that had never really been mine. The place technically belonged to her and her late husband. When Emily and I married, I suggested finding a new home, something fresh, something ours. She refused. Said Anna had grown up here. It wouldn't feel right to move her out. Anna was 17 then, tall, indifferent, and sharp-tongued. She barely acknowledged me, never called me by name, and treated me like a tenant in her mother's shrine. Still, I stayed. I brought only a few bags, a bookshelf I built myself, and an old coffee table I refinished. I told myself love could grow in borrowed soil. I repainted rooms, repaired leaky faucets, and memorized Emily's favorite recipes: okra stew, cornbread, sweet tea. On our first anniversary, I cooked for hours, and Anna walked in, sniffed, and said, "Smells like cafeteria food," before walking off. I laughed it off, believing patience could melt resentment. But patience only made me invisible. Then came the accident. Atlanta, a conference, a car that crossed the line. She came home paralyzed from the chest down, sobbing, and I held her, whispering, "We'll get through this." And we did, at least physically. I transformed the downstairs office into a bedroom, installed handrails, bought a mobility van, handled her insurance, arranged her mother's funeral, consoled her when Anna dropped out of college. I thought I was building a fortress of devotion. Turns out, I was building a cage. The next morning, after overhearing her betrayal, I made breakfast like nothing had changed: grits, eggs, turkey sausage. She came home that afternoon, discharged and grinning, as if she were the hero returning from war. "Nothing like coming home," she said as I helped her into her wheelchair. The house felt colder than ever. Anna showed up later, rummaging through the fridge. "Mom, good?" she asked, not even glancing at me. "She's resting," I replied. "Still needs help moving. So if you could, nah? I've got work," she interrupted, cracking open a soda. "Anyway, it's not like this place belongs to you." That sentence landed harder than a punch. I switched off the kitchen light and walked away. No yelling, no crying, just silence. A silence heavy enough to split something inside me. That evening, Emily settled into her couch like a queen reclaiming her throne. God, I missed this sofa. And that TV. No sports at the hospital, just news and baking shows. I poured her water, adjusted her pillow, and nodded. No thank you, no recognition. just entitlement wrapped in habit. Later, while unpacking her medication, I noticed the pill organizer untouched from 5 days ago. I stared at it, realizing I didn't want to refill it. Not yet. Not ever. A few days passed. I began sorting through the drawers, the paperwork, the insurance files she made me organize over the years. In one folder marked Miscellaneous Accounts, I found a life insurance declaration form. The primary beneficiaries, Anna Green and someone named Benjamin Clark. I blinked. No mention of me, not even as an alternate. I wasn't expecting money, but erasure that hit harder than any wound. When dinner came, I cooked her favorite lasagna but changed the ingredients. No mozzarella this time, just ricotta, spinach, and red pepper flakes. She took a bite and frowned. This tastes weird. Where's the mozzarella? You know I hate it without cheese. I was out, I said. Didn't have time to buy more. Her tone was sharp, almost accusing. Maybe I've just started seeing things more clearly, I replied. She fell silent, blinking, her mouth tightening. For once, she didn't have a comeback. That night, as she scrolled through her phone and I pretended to read, her earlier words looped in my mind. He's basically a free caretaker. I realized I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a ghost bound by routine. But ghosts can disappear when they choose. And I was already fading. I had become a machine, a background fixture in her carefully curated existence, a shadow orbiting a planet that no longer noticed me. How do you care for someone who's erased you from their future? 5 years of service disguised as devotion had left me with nothing but an aching back and a bruised soul. I thought I was a husband, but I had been an employee, paid not in money but in crumbs of affection, reimbursed with guilt and bound by duty. Love had become labor. Compassion was my only benefit. Silence was my severance. The next morning, I didn't make her breakfast. Instead, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge, my fingers brushing against a magnet, holding a photo from our first trip to Savannah, Georgia. She was smiling in that picture. I was too, but now I could see the imbalance even in our poses. She leaned forward, radiant, and I leaned in like a man anchoring himself to a collapsing building. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I reached out. My old friend's number was still saved on my phone. When she answered on the second ring, her voice hit me like sunlight through a dusty window. "Mark, that you?" she said, breathless but warm. "Yeah," I whispered. "Do you have a moment?" There was a pause, then a softness in her tone. "I've got all day. Where are you? Come by." I didn't pack anything. I grabbed my wallet, keys, and left. No explanations for Emily. No note. When I arrived, my friend, Nora, stood in front of her bookstore, apron still on, hands outstretched. She hugged me without a word, then led me to the small back garden where ivy wrapped around a rusted fence. She poured me a glass of chilled ginger mint tea and said, "You look like a man who's been holding his breath for years." I couldn't deny it. The words spilled out of me like a flood breaching a dam. I told her everything. What I'd overheard at the hospital, what I'd found in the insurance documents, how Anna looked through me as if I were a hired nurse. Not family. Nora listened quietly, not once interrupting, her eyes heavy with empathy. When I finally stopped talking, she exhaled and said, "Mark, you weren't in a marriage. You were managing a patient." I blinked. She leaned forward. "She didn't see you as a man. She saw you as a service. You don't owe your life to someone just because they need your hands." The silence between us was almost sacred. "I'm only 32, I murmured. "But I feel 70. "That's because you've been carrying 2 lives on your back," she said gently. "You forgot what it's like to walk upright. That ends now. Stay here for a while. I've got a spare room upstairs." I nodded slowly. "I think I need to." "Good. Tomorrow, we'll visit the courthouse and see what your rights really are." That night, I lay in a small room with peeling sunflower wallpaper and a creaky ceiling fan. But for the first time in years, I dreamed not of Emily, nor Anna, just of myself, breathing freely. When I woke the next morning, I didn't cry. I smiled. The storm was finally changing direction. Within a week, most of my belongings were in Nora's guest room. It was small, just a twin bed, a desk, and an old radio, but it felt like peace. Nora's bookstore, the Paper Lantern, occupied a corner in Durham's historic district. Behind it was a courtyard bursting with hydrangeas, cosmos, and a line of yellow roses she called freedom blooms. That garden became my sanctuary, and Nora, my mirror. One afternoon, as we drank hibiscus tea surrounded by bees and sunlight, she said, "You know, most people think leaving is the hardest part, but it's not. The hardest part is realizing you're allowed to leave. She was right. For 5 years, I thought endurance equaled loyalty, that staying made me strong. But it was leaving that restored my soul. With her help, I contacted a local law firm, Hart and Lowell, known for representing men and women in domestic care arrangements gone wrong. The lead attorney, Dana Hart, sharp-eyed and calm, listened to my story, flipping through documents, marriage certificate, hospital invoices, household bills. Were you employed during the marriage? She asked. Freelance carpenter, I said. But for the last 3 years, full-time caretaker. Did you contribute financially? Yes. Paid off a few debts, even covered Anna's tuition for a semester when Emily was out of work. Dana nodded, writing briskly. Then you invested not only time but money. That matters. You weren't just a helper. You were her spouse, caretaker, and dependent. North Carolina recognizes equitable distribution. You have rights to marital assets and possibly spousal support, even after 5 years. My pulse raced. Really? Absolutely, she said firmly. We've won stronger cases with less. I left her office lighter, not from victory, but from validation. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming visibility. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay awake, watching the fan spin shadows across the ceiling, remembering every quiet dinner, every ignored conversation, every moment I'd let myself disappear behind Emily's needs. The next morning, I took my first real step. I filed for legal separation. Then I called my cousin, Simon, a financial advisor who'd helped countless people restart after divorce. He picked up on the first ring. It's time, huh, he said knowingly. Yeah, I whispered. It really is. Within days, Simon connected me to a certified financial planner, helped me open my own bank account, and begin assessing the assets Emily and I shared. He also introduced me to a men's support group called New Dawn, where I met others who'd lived parallel lives. One man who had cared for his disabled girlfriend for 8 years before she left him for someone else. Another who had funded his partner's education only to be abandoned once she succeeded. A third who was contesting a prenup he'd signed out of blind trust. We laughed, cried, and, for the first time in years, I didn't feel foolish for having loved too deeply. Back at Emily's house, things shifted. She began texting first, short, polite messages. Hey, are you coming by to grab your stuff? Then came the guilt trips. We should talk. People will wonder what happened. Finally, Anna's messages appeared, angry, defensive. You're being dramatic. You're ruining your life over hurt feelings. I didn't respond. Silence became my language. One evening, Nora came upstairs holding her phone. You might want to see this, she said, handing it to me. It was Anna's social media post. Some people crave sympathy for their choices. My mom's not a villain just because she didn't dedicate her life to a man who knew what he was signing up for. Y'all love drama. I stared at it, then deleted the app. I didn't need an audience. I had already reclaimed my story. In court, Dana moved fast. She demanded Emily's full financial disclosures, insurance, retirement, and credit statements. That's when we discovered she'd transferred $40,000 to Anna's account just 2 months before I left. That's asset redirection, Dana said. We'll challenge it. For the first time, I felt the scales of justice tilt slightly my way. But the real shift came when Emily's attorney tried to arrange a settlement meeting without me. Dana refused. My client insists on transparency. He's not settling in the dark. He's earned his right to light. Something inside me flared, quiet, fierce, unstoppable. Not triumph yet, but liberation. The night before the court hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay beneath the ceiling fan, moonlight flickering across the room, thinking about how far I'd come, from a man who tiptoed around his own house to one walking into court with a lawyer by his side. I wasn't scared anymore. I was clear. The next morning, I dressed simply. Navy slacks, white shirt, no tie. Power didn't come from appearance. It came from truth. Downstairs, Nora handed me breakfast, steel-cut oats, almond butter, mint tea. You ready? She asked softly. I nodded. I was. I had never been more ready for anything. Simon picked me up in front of the bookstore that morning, dressed in a gray suit with sharp lapels and that unshakable confidence he always carried. You look like a man who finally knows his worth, he said with a grin. At the courthouse, things moved faster than I expected. Dana handled the pre-hearing filings while I sat quietly, palms pressed together, steadying my breath. Emily arrived an hour later, wheeled in by Anna. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but spiritually, like the world had finally caught up to her arrogance. Her skin was pale, her posture rigid, her gaze avoiding mine. The courtroom was cold, humming with the low static of air conditioning and consequence. When the judge entered, everything sharpened. Dana stood and, with calm precision, walked the court through 5 years of unpaid caregiving, financial contribution, emotional exhaustion, and human sacrifice. She presented screenshots of transactions, medical notes from my doctor about stress-induced insomnia, and even one of Anna's old social posts mocking me. When Dana revealed the $40,000 transfer Emily had made to Anna's account 2 months before I left, the judge's pen stopped midair. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to drown in. Emily's attorney attempted to argue that I had chosen to be a caretaker and therefore deserved no compensation for love. Dana's brow lifted slightly as she replied, "He's not asking for payment for love. He's seeking acknowledgement for labor. There's a difference." When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked me a single question. "Do you believe this marriage was reciprocal in care, respect, and dignity?" I didn't hesitate. "No, Your Honor. I gave everything, and in return, I received nothing." That was it. No theatrics, just truth. 2 days later, the verdict arrived. I was awarded 35% of our marital assets, including part of the retirement fund, and $800 per month in support for 18 months. The court also reversed the $40,000 transfer to Anna, labeling it an attempt to conceal assets. I didn't feel triumphant, just clean. It wasn't revenge, it was release. That night, I sat with Nora on the back patio of her shop beneath a sky streaked with violet. She handed me a glass of sparkling apple cider. "To new chapters," she said. We clinked glasses, and for once, the word new didn't feel terrifying. Emily never contacted me again. But Anna did, furious. 3 days later, she barged into the shop during closing hours, slamming her hand on the counter. "You're proud of yourself, huh?" she spat. "You got your little payday, took food off my mom's plate. You think that makes you a man?" I didn't respond. I kept folding wrapping paper, my hands steady. "You were just a replacement. My dad was the real man in her life. You were convenient. You won't get another cent, you hear me." Before I could speak, Nora stepped out from the back, eyes blazing. "Say one more word, and I'm calling the police," she said. Anna froze, sneered, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chimes fell silent. I didn't flinch. I simply swept the dirt she left behind out the door. "You okay?" Nora asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. That was her storm, not mine. Later that night, I opened an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. There was one picture of Emily and me before the accident, both of us smiling outside a concert venue. I stared at it for a long while. It was fine to remember, but it wasn't fine to return. By then, I had started working remotely for a small publishing company, doing freelance editing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, my name on the invoices, my password on the account, my signature on the tax forms. For the first time in years, I was creating something that didn't belong to someone else. My work, my effort, my identity. I also joined a local writing group at the library. Once a week, a handful of us would gather to read essays and poems over coffee. The first piece I shared was called "What Love Costs When It Stops Being Mutual." They applauded. A few people wiped away tears. One woman said, "This is the kind of story that makes men feel seen." I hadn't expected that reaction, but I realized I needed it too. A few months later, while repotting flowers in the shop with Nora, a courier arrived with an urgent letter. It was from the hospital. Emily had been admitted 2 nights earlier after a hypertensive crisis and a brief cardiac arrest. Her file listed no next of kin. The fields for emergency contact were blank. I stood there reading it without panic or pity, just stillness. Then I called Dana and said, "Transfer all health decisions to Anna." Hours later, she texted back, "Done." Apparently, Anna didn't show up at the hospital either. Too busy, the nurses said. No visitors came. For a woman who once thrived on control and admiration, that silence must have been louder than any courtroom ruling. She had built a life of dominance and dependence, and now it had collapsed into isolation. Meanwhile, I began to breathe differently. Summer arrived. The mornings softened. I woke without dread, cooked breakfast for myself. Oatmeal with honey, eggs on sourdough, sometimes just fruit and tea. Cooking for myself became a quiet rebellion, an act of restoration. I started a blog called Unkept Vows. The first post was titled "From Being Needed to Being Seen." It was about what it costs to love someone until you vanish, and what it means to finally choose yourself without bitterness. The post went viral, 4,000 readers in a week. Men and women alike wrote back. Teachers, Nurses, single parents, even a 26-year-old artist from Oakland who had just left a manipulative partner. One comment stayed with me. You put into words what I didn't know I was allowed to feel. Thank you. A few weeks later, Simon stopped by again with a brass plaque engraved. This space belongs to Mark. We mounted it above the small shelf in the upstairs flat where I kept my books and candles. Nora grinned and said, "See, you didn't just leave a marriage, you reclaimed your name." On weekends, I helped her at the shop. Customers loved the floral arrangements I put together. Odd combinations of colors that somehow harmonized, much like my life. Uneven, scarred, but beautiful. One woman laughed at a label I'd written, "Resilience Bloom." "What's that mean?" she asked. "It means you bloomed late, but completely," I said, smiling. That afternoon, I received one last message from the hospital's caseworker. "Your name has been removed from all emergency contact lists. No further action required." I didn't cry. I didn't feel joy or grief. Just closure. I closed my phone, stepped outside, and stretched my arms toward the North Carolina sky. It was done. That same week, I finished editing my first full-length manuscript, a memoir by a woman who had escaped a controlling community. She ended her book with this line: "Leaving the fire doesn't mean you were weak for staying. It means you were brave enough to stop burning." I added that quote to my blog's footer. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at a support conference hosted by New Dawn. At first, I doubted my story mattered. But when I stood on that stage and saw the faces of people who had lived the same quiet pain, the words poured out effortlessly. I told them everything. Not just the betrayal, but the erasure, the loneliness, and the resurrection of self. When I finished, the room stood. Some wiped tears. Others simply nodded, as if they had been waiting their whole lives for someone to name what they'd endured. Afterward, one man hugged me and whispered, "You gave me permission to start over." In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. Back home, I painted my room a soft amber hue, hung Simon's plaque above the bed, and lit a eucalyptus candle. Sometimes, grief still visited, but I didn't scold myself for it. Grief wasn't proof of weakness. It was proof I'd cared. Months later, I passed Anna on the courthouse steps. Our eyes met. This time, there was no anger, only quiet recognition. She looked away first. I kept walking, because I was never meant to shrink for someone else's comfort. I wasn't meant to serve and vanish. I was meant to live. Today, I run a small newsletter with over 7,000 subscribers, teach online writing workshops, and recently enrolled in a creative nonfiction course at the community college. Some afternoons, I sit on the patio behind Nora's shop, sipping tea while the wind stirs the roses, thinking about how far I've come. I didn't just survive love that turned into servitude. I outgrew it. My name is Mark, and I am not a caretaker. I am not an accessory. I am a man who chose to walk away when devotion became erasure. I gave until I disappeared. Now I write myself back into existence, one sentence at a time. This isn't an ending. It's a beginning. Because healing doesn't whisper, it roars. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.